Story 1: The Lookout That Didn't Want Visitors. This happened back in 2019, during a time when exploring abandoned places had become something of a regular hobby for me and my friend Jackson. We weren't reckless thrill seekers, and we definitely weren't into breaking laws or sneaking into places we shouldn't be. If anything, we preferred locations that were far from cities, far from people, places that felt forgotten rather than forbidden. That's how we came across the Fire Lookout Tower. Jackson had stumbled onto a small Reddit thread buried deep in an abandoned places subreddit for our state. The post itself was vague, almost intentionally so. The original poster didn't list the location, didn't include directions, and seemed hesitant to give away too much information, as if trying to protect the place from becoming overrun. The photos attached were grainy and old, but unmistakably showed a structure sitting alone atop a wooded hill. Curious, I messaged the poster directly. At first, he was reluctant. He asked why we wanted to know. He warned that sharing locations publicly ruined spots like this. I assured him we weren't going to post anything, that we just wanted to explore quietly and leave things as we found them. After a bit of back and forth, he finally sent me the coordinates, stressing that I not share them with anyone else. When we plugged the coordinates into a map, sure enough, there was a structure marked right where he said it would be. No roads. No trails. No nearby landmarks. Nothing else mentioned it online. It genuinely looked like a place time had forgotten. We packed up and headed out early on a Monday morning. Getting there was uncomfortable from the start. There were no proper trails, no clear paths cutting through the woods, just dense forest and uneven ground. We relied entirely on the GPS, watching the distance count down slowly as we pushed through brush and fallen branches. The deeper we went, the stranger the woods began to feel. There was a heaviness to it, a pressure that settled into my chest without explanation. If Jackson hadn't been there, I know for a fact I would have turned around and left. The feeling was that strong. When I mentioned it to him, he admitted he felt it too. Something about the place felt wrong. Still, we kept going, telling ourselves it was just nerves. Up until the very last minute, there was no sign we were anywhere near the lookout tower. No cleared ground. No structure visible through the trees. Nothing. Then suddenly, barely 30 feet ahead, the forest opened into a small clearing, and there it was. The lookout tower wasn't what we'd expected. It wasn't a tall, skeletal structure on stilts like most fire lookouts. Instead, it was more like a cabin sitting directly on the hilltop, overlooking the forest below. The siding was gray and splintered with age. Several windows were broken, and the others were so thick with grime and fog that they looked painted over. One side of the roof sagged noticeably, partially collapsed, giving the whole building a subtle lean, as if the ground beneath it had shifted over time. Jackson was thrilled. He circled the place, inspecting everything with excitement. I followed more cautiously, that uneasy feeling from the woods still clinging to me. I didn't want to ruin the moment by saying anything. Jackson knocked on the door. Then he opened it. Inside, the cabin was darker than it should have been. Windows lined nearly every wall, but barely any light made it through the filth coating them. The floor was littered with debris, rusted tools, a broken lantern, crushed beer cans that looked decades old. And then there was the note. It was taped neatly to the far wall. Clean. White. New. 3 words were written on it. Hope you're happy. Felt horribly out of place. I showed Jackson, and we both laughed it off at first, assuming the Reddit poster had left it there as a joke. Still, the message didn't feel playful. Felt bitter. Almost accusatory. The sun was already dipping low, so we shut the door, unpacked our gear, and settled in for the night. I fired up the camping stove and boiled water for ramen while the forest outside grew quiet. That night felt wrong. We barely spoke. We ate in silence, listening to the cabin creak as the wind pushed against its aging frame. Neither of us tried to start a conversation, which was unusual for us. Felt like the air itself was heavy, pressing down. Eventually, we crawled into our sleeping bags and fell asleep. I woke up to pitch darkness. The cabin was silent except for faint creaks in the wood. Something felt off immediately. I rolled over and saw Jackson's sleeping bag was empty. I sat up. "Jackson," I whispered. No response. Then came a dull thud against the wood above me. Another. Slow, deliberate thuds moved across the roof. My eyes followed the sound just as the door suddenly opened and Jackson stepped inside, nearly causing my heart to explode out of my chest. I hushed him immediately. Whatever I'd heard stopped the moment he entered. He said he'd gone outside to relieve himself. When I asked about the roof, he looked at me like I was insane. I checked myself. Nothing was there. The rest of the night passed uneasily. The next day, the forest felt unnaturally still. We explored the area but found nothing. Just endless stretches of dead trees and silence. At sundown, as Jackson went to close the door, he froze. A man stood at the edge of the clearing. He wore a gray flannel. A rifle hung over his shoulder. His hair and beard were unkempt. But his eyes were empty. When I spoke to him, he didn't respond. He simply turned and walked back into the woods. Later that night, shadows moved outside the cabin. 3 soft knocks came at the door. Then 3 violent blows. Nothing followed. At sunrise, we fled. The Reddit post was gone. The account deleted. I still think about that note. Hope you're happy. Story 2, The Cellar Under the Lookout. I'm keeping my identity private, but this happened about 5 years ago, back when my life was basically a constant loop of moving, hiking, and sleeping wherever the map let me. I was traveling with my dog, Rocky. Yeah, I know the name isn't creative, but I gave it to him because I'd found him wandering alone near the edge of a mountain range years earlier, like he'd been dropped there or had simply decided the wild was better than whatever he ran from. When I first found him, he was a medium-sized Australian Shepherd mix, all dust and burrs, ribs faintly visible under his coat. A vet estimated he'd been around 6 or 7 years old at the time. No collar. No chip. No missing dog posters that matched him. I tried for weeks to track down an owner. Online posts, shelter calls, local notices, but nothing ever came back. Eventually the truth became obvious. Either nobody was looking, or whoever had owned him didn't want him found. So I kept him. Rocky turned into the kind of dog you can't imagine your life without. The kind that learns your routines fast, watches your hands when you pack, and somehow knows the difference between "we're going for a walk" and "we're going into the woods for real." He was older when I adopted him, but he still had a strong body, a quick mind, and a cautious loyalty that felt earned, not automatic. On trails, he'd stay close enough that I could always see him, but far enough to warn me if something moved ahead. I trusted him more than I trusted my own instincts sometimes, because dogs don't argue with themselves the way people do. That trip, the one I'm talking about, was supposed to be simple. Nothing dramatic. Just an overnight backpack along a firebreak trail to a ridge where an old lookout tower sat retired and forgotten. The plan wasn't even to stay inside the tower. I'd read some outdated notes online that suggested it used to be first come, first serve as a public shelter with a 3-night limit. But the information was old enough that it might as well have been rumor. I didn't dig deep because in my head the tower was just a waypoint. Reach the ridge, take in the view, maybe eat something quick, then hike down a few more miles to a creek where I'd seen a small tent spot marked by other hikers. 1 day in, 1 day out. Easy. Rocky and I started midday. The weather was already turning in that late-season way where the air feels thin and sharp, like it's been scraped clean. The trail was quiet, too quiet, but not in a way that screamed danger. More like the forest was holding its breath. The firebreak was wide and practical, the kind of path built for utility rather than beauty, and it wound upward with long, steady elevation that slowly started to burn my legs. Rocky moved smoothly beside me, occasionally drifting off the trail edge to sniff something and then returning like he was tethered by an invisible line. Every now and then he'd stop and look back at me. Not anxious, not playful, just checking like he needed to confirm I was still there. About 30 minutes out from the tower, the sky changed. It wasn't gradual. It was like someone flipped a switch. Dark, heavy clouds rolled in over the ridgeline with a speed that didn't feel natural. The light dropped. The wind picked up. Rocky's ears shifted back and he looked up at the sky. Then at me, then ahead again. I started moving faster. As the last stretch of trail climbed toward the ridge, I finally got a view across the valley, and what I saw made my stomach tighten. A thick wall of rain and lightning chewing through the mountain directly across from us. It looked like a living thing moving toward our side, swallowing the distant treeline in gray. I've camped in storms. I'm not naive about weather. But I also know the difference between uncomfortable and unsafe. If the storm hit before I made it down to the creek, I'd be trying to set up a tent in wind and heavy rain with Rocky panicking beside me, and the ground turning to slick mud under my boots. I hesitated, still trying to do the math. And then the storm decided for me. The first burst of rain hit hard, like thrown gravel. Within seconds it turned into a downpour that soaked the trail and slapped against the brush. Rocky shook himself and pressed closer to my leg. I could barely see the path ahead, but I could see the silhouette of the lookout tower through the rain, dark and square against the sky. We rushed for it. When we reached the tower, I pushed the door open and stepped inside with Rocky right behind me. The sound changed instantly. Outside was chaos. Wind, rain, thunder. Inside was a hollow, damp quiet, like the building itself was exhausted. It looked exactly like what you'd expect from something abandoned but still standing. White paint peeling in long strips. Rust stains creeping down corners. A metal stove bolted into one side, old enough that it looked like it belonged to a different era. The windows were grimy, the glass slightly warped with age, and the whole structure had that subtle sway you only notice when you stop moving, like the tower had a tiny amount of give in its bones. What surprised me most was how empty it was. No matriz. No trash-pile. No old food wrappers. None of the usual signs that hikers had been using it as a shelter. It felt like a place people avoided, not a place people found. The storm intensified. Rain hammered the roof so hard it sounded like 1,000 fingers drumming in unison. Wind shoved at the walls, and through gaps in the old wood I could feel cold air cutting inside. The tower shuddered with certain gusts, just enough that I couldn't ignore it. Rocky didn't like that. He didn't like storms in general, but this was different. He paced in tight loops near the door, tail tucked low, nails clicking against the floorboards. Every time thunder cracked, he flinched like he expected the sound to physically strike him. I dropped my pack and tried to calm him. Told myself it was just weather, just height, just the sway. To make it more bearable, I laid out my sleeping bag on the floor to create a little base. I pulled out my dinner kit and made a freeze-dried meal. The smell of hot food, even bland hot food, usually makes things feel normal. It's hard to feel truly lost or threatened when you're eating something warm. But Rocky wouldn't settle. He kept staring at the door, then the windows, then back to the door. Quiet whining, like he was trying not to make noise. Every so often he'd stop completely and listen, head tilted slightly, ears forward. The rain was loud enough that it should have drowned out anything small, and yet his body language was telling me he was hearing something that didn't belong. I called him over and had him sit with me. Ran my hand through his fur, spoke low and steady. He leaned into me, but his eyes kept sliding away from mine, returning to the same points in the room like he was tracking movement I couldn't see. That's when I heard it. Not loud, not obvious, just wrong. A faint, hollow thunk, like metal shifting under pressure, coming from beneath the floor. It was subtle enough that it could have been the building settling. Could have been a gust hitting something outside. But it had a shape to it, a distinct metal-on-metal quality that didn't match the creaks of wood. A few minutes passed. I listened harder. I heard it again during a brief lull in the rain. Then a pause. Then nothing. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it because Rocky was already on edge and I'd absorbed his fear without realizing. That happens. It's human. Eventually, the storm became a kind of white noise. I ate, cleaned up, and crawled into the sleeping bag. Rocky finally climbed in beside me, half in, half out, like he couldn't fully commit to resting. Thunder rolled in the distance. Rain continued to hammer the roof. Against my will, my eyelids got heavy. I started to drift. I don't know how long I slept, but when I woke up, the first thing I noticed was silence. No rain, no wind, no thunder, just dead quiet. That kind of silence in the woods is never comforting. It's the kind that feels staged, like the world has paused and is waiting to see what you'll do. I sat up and immediately realized Rocky wasn't in the sleeping bag anymore. He was standing by the door, body tense, giving me that look dogs get when they need to go out. But it wasn't just that. His whining wasn't impatient. It was nervous. His head kept turning toward the darkness outside, then back toward me like he didn't want to go alone but also didn't want to stay inside. I checked my watch. Just past 2 a.m. I stared at the door for a moment, debating with myself. Then I did what I always do, tried to handle the practical need first. I put my shoes on, grabbed my flashlight, clipped Rocky's leash, and opened the door. Cold air slid in. Outside, the ground was soaked and shiny under the beam of my light. The field between the tower and the treeline looked darker than it should have, almost like it absorbed the light rather than reflected it. Fog clung low to the earth. The forest beyond was a black wall. No movement, no wind through branches, nothing. Rocky stepped down the creaky stairs, moving carefully. I stayed near the tower, keeping the flashlight trained on him while he sniffed around and did his business. The quiet pressed in. Then I heard a sound behind me. A thin metal squeak, the kind you hear when a hinge moves or something is being lifted and settles back down. At first I assumed it was the tower shifting. But the sound didn't come from above or around me. It came from under the tower. I turned, aiming the flashlight down beneath the structure, and that's when I saw it. 2 metal cellar doors set into the ground, like the kind you'd see on an old property that had a storage space or root cellar. The doors were slightly warped, edges rusted, with wet leaves stuck to them from the storm. They weren't obvious from a distance. I wouldn't have noticed them in daylight unless I was looking for them. And yet, in that moment, under the flashlight beam, they might as well have been glowing. My mind snapped back to the sound I'd heard earlier, that faint metal thunk beneath the floor. My stomach tightened. Because once you notice something like that, it stops being a maybe and becomes a why. I approached slowly, Rocky's leash in my hand. He watched me, uneasy, tail low. I crouched by the doors and saw something that made my skin prickle. Wet mud on the steps leading down. Fresh. Not old dried stains. Not random splashes. Distinct footprints. Wet spots climbing up each step like someone had come up recently, and then gone back down. The cellar didn't look deep. Maybe 5 or 6 steps. Just enough to disappear under the tower. I hesitated, flashlight beam shaking slightly from my breathing. Then, against my better judgment, I reached for one of the metal doors and lifted it. It moved heavier than expected, like it was swollen with moisture. The hinge groaned softly. I angled the flashlight down the steps. The beam swallowed by darkness after a few feet. And then Rocky barked. One sharp bark, high and terrified, like a warning he couldn't hold back. I didn't think. I just dropped the door closed with a clang and spun around, the flashlight snapping toward the treeline. In the brief sweep of light, I saw something shift, just past Rocky, at the edge of the woods. Not a deer. Not a branch swaying. A shape, a human-sized movement slipping behind trees. I called Rocky back so fast my voice cracked. He bolted to me immediately, and in that second I knew everything I needed to know. We were not alone out there. I ran up the stairs with Rocky and slammed the tower door shut behind us. My hands were shaking as I locked it, though the lock felt flimsy and symbolic more than protective. I didn't bother trying to be quiet anymore. Whoever was out there already knew I'd seen something. I grabbed my sleeping bag, rolled it tight, clipped it to my pack. I didn't even fully organize my gear. I stuffed things into pockets, tightened straps, and kept glancing at the windows, waiting for a silhouette to appear. Rocky stayed pressed to my leg, trembling, eyes fixed on the door. We moved fast. We exited the tower, went down the steps, and as soon as my boots hit the ground, I instinctively turned the flashlight back under the tower toward the cellar. The doors were open. Both of them. Wide open, like something had pushed them up from inside, or like someone had opened them and stepped out while I was running back inside. Rocky stared at the cellar so hard it looked like he wanted to growl but didn't dare. My chest went cold. We didn't walk after that. We didn't carefully leave. We left. We hit the firebreak trail at a near run, and for the first mile I kept glancing back over my shoulder, expecting to see someone following. Some shadow moving between trees, a figure pacing us just out of reach of the flashlight. Nothing. But the silence didn't feel like safety. Felt like restraint. Eventually the rain started again, light at first and then heavier, like the storm was returning to cover its tracks. That helped in a twisted way. Rain means footprints disappear, sounds get masked, visibility drops. It also means whoever was out there had less reason to chase us openly. We kept moving until I felt distance in my bones. By the time morning came and I had enough signal, I called the Forest Service. I expected them to shrug, to tell me it was just an old tower and people used it sometimes, to dismiss it. Instead, the ranger's tone changed as soon as I described the location. He told me the lookout tower I'd mentioned was not in service, and more importantly, it was off-limits to the public. I pressed him, asked why, asked what off-limits meant. He wouldn't give me details, but his pauses said plenty. He kept his words careful, like he'd been trained to avoid saying something he wasn't supposed to say out loud. All he really confirmed was that there had been issues in that area. Enough issues that they stopped letting people use the tower at all. Enough that information about it wasn't being kept current online. After I hung up, I sat there with Rocky beside me, staring at my hands. There are harmless explanations, sure. Maybe someone was living in the cellar. A squatter. Someone hiding from the world. But then why did they open the doors at night? Why were there fresh muddy steps going upward? Why did something shift in the treeline like a person watching us? And why, when Rocky barked, did it feel like whatever was out there had been waiting for me to notice? The worst part isn't even what I saw. It's what I didn't see. Because the cellar was dark. Deep enough to hide a person. And I lifted that door without knowing what was under it. If Rocky hadn't barked, if he hadn't snapped me out of that stupid human curiosity, I don't know what would have happened next. I don't know if someone would have come up those steps. I don't know if someone was already standing there, just beyond the beam of my flashlight, waiting for the right moment. It's been long enough now that I've accepted I'll never get answers. But I also know this. Leaving that tower at 2 a.m. felt like walking away from something I wasn't supposed to survive. And Rocky, my stubborn, anxious, storm-hating dog, might be the only reason I did. Story 3: The bonfire below the tower. It happened a little over 3 decades ago, back when I was in my 20s and the summers still felt endless. I spent 9 seasons working as a fire lookout for the Forest Ranger Service. 9 summers of living above the treeline, alone in a small wooden tower, watching the horizon like it was my job to keep the world from catching fire. And it was. Most people imagine the work as dramatic, smoke columns, lightning strikes, helicopters, like a movie. But the reality was mostly quiet. Honest, repetitive quiet. Every hour I'd step outside, check the wind, read the temperature, note the humidity, and radio the numbers in. After that, the day belonged to me. I'd make coffee on a small stove, read paperback novels with sun-faded covers, scribble notes in a journal, or walk the trails that looped around the ridge. I got used to solitude in a way that's hard to explain. The kind of solitude where you start to recognize individual trees like neighbors, where the forest isn't a backdrop. It's a living thing that you're standing inside. Over time, I became capable out there. Confident. Not reckless, but comfortable. Comfortable enough to believe that the woods were predictable. That belief lasted right up until the night Brady vanished. That day started like every other day. The sky was clear, the air was dry enough to make your lips crack, and the forest below looked still, almost brittle. I remember it being one of those evenings where the sunset doesn't fade so much as it drains away, like someone is lowering a dimmer switch over the entire world. I recorded my last set of data points after dark, then radioed the ranger station to let them know I was clocking out for the night. The overnight ranger on duty was a young guy named Brady. He worked out of the lower station, a small cabin set up a few miles down trail from my tower, closer to the access road. Brady and I weren't friends exactly, but we talked almost every night. There wasn't much else to do. We'd exchange quick updates, weather, trail conditions, whether any campers had checked in, whether any smoke had been spotted in the valley. Sometimes we'd fill the silence with small talk. It wasn't deep, but it was familiar. A human voice on the other end of the radio that reminded you the world still existed below the ridge. That night, nothing seemed unusual in our call. I said I was done for the day, he acknowledged it, and that was that. I ate something simple, whatever I could heat up without thinking, and lay back on the cot for a while. The lookout station had a certain smell. Old pine, dust, faint metal from the radio equipment, and the ever-present scent of dry air. Everything creaked when the wind changed direction. The tower was sturdy, but it moved in tiny, constant ways that you stopped noticing after a while. Around that time, maybe an hour or two after sunset, I decided to step out onto the balcony to look at the stars. The sky up there was different than the sky in town. The darkness was deeper, cleaner. You could see constellations that don't even feel real until you're alone on a mountain with no light pollution and the world stretched out beneath you. I hadn't even finished taking in the view before something caught my eye. A light. Not moonlight. Not a reflection. A warm, flickering orange glowed down in the trees, less than a quarter mile away. It pulsed in a way that made it instantly recognizable. Fire. A campfire, or at least something burning hot enough to look like one through the branches. My stomach tightened immediately. At the time, there was a strict campfire ban due to dry conditions. No exceptions. Not even small controlled flames. A single ember could travel. A single bad decision could turn into a hillside inferno. Everyone knew that. Which meant if someone had a fire going that close to my tower, it wasn't just careless, it was dangerous. I picked up my radio and called Brady. Brady, you got anyone out here tonight? Any permits? Any approved camping anywhere near my position? His response came quick, and it sounded normal. No tension in his voice. No confusion. Just straightforward. No permits. Nobody checked in for that area. Where are you seeing it? I described it as best I could, direction, distance, what I could see through the trees. He paused for a beat, then said something that still makes my skin crawl when I remember it. Since it was so close, he told me to go down there myself. Just walk over, tell them to put it out, and not even worry about running them off. He said it like it was nothing, like it was a mild rule violation. And because I'd spent 9 summers out there, because I was comfortable, because I trusted routine and procedure and the sound of another ranger's voice, I listened. I grabbed my flashlight. I clipped my radio to my belt. I headed down the stairs of the tower and started walking toward the glow. It should have been 5 minutes. That's what it felt like. Just a short walk through familiar trees. I remember thinking I'd be back before the air even had time to get colder. I wasn't going down there to confront anyone. Not really. I wasn't a cop. I wasn't going to start an argument. I was just going to do what Brady said. Tell them to put it out and move on. But with each step, the feeling changed. The forest at night is never truly silent. You hear wind moving through needles, distant insects, maybe an owl. But that night had a strange stillness. The kind of stillness where your own breathing sounds too loud. The kind where your flashlight beam feels like it's cutting into something that doesn't want to be seen. When I reached the light, I realized something immediately. It wasn't a campsite. There was no tent, no pack, no sleeping bag, no cooler, no chairs, no human noise, no voices, no movement beyond the fire itself. Just a fire burning hot on bare ground. And it wasn't a careful campfire. It was closer to a bonfire. Logs stacked and burning with purpose. Flames strong enough to throw hard shadows on the surrounding trees. It looked less like someone warming their hands and more like someone trying to announce themselves. Or worse, trying to announce something to me. I called out, "Hello? Ranger service. Fire ban's in effect. Whoever's here needs to put it out." No response. I called again, louder, scanning the tree line with my flashlight. The beam swept across trunks and brush and patches of darkness that the light didn't reach. Still nothing. For the first time all night, real fear started to creep in. Not the normal, I'm alone in the woods, feeling, but something sharper. Something that told me I wasn't the only one making decisions anymore. I radioed Brady. "Brady, I'm at the fire. Nobody's here. It's just burning. No gear, no campers." I waited for his response. Static. I tried again. Same message, different tone, more urgent. Static. I shifted the radio, checked the antenna, adjusted the angle like that would somehow fix the world. Static. And in 9 years of working those towers, I can tell you this, radios don't just go dead like that without a reason. Not without weather. Not without terrain. And Brady had been responding just minutes earlier. A cold wave hit me. Not from the air. The air was cold, sure. But this was inside my chest. A sudden, animal understanding that something was wrong in a way my brain hadn't caught up to yet. I didn't investigate. I didn't walk deeper into the trees. I didn't try to find footprints. I didn't stand there wondering. I kicked the logs apart, scattered the burning wood, and buried the embers with dirt as fast as I could. I didn't do it neatly. I did it like a man trying to erase a signal. Then I turned and hurried back toward the tower. That walk back felt nothing like the walk there. The same trees were now different shapes. The same trail was now a corridor. My flashlight beam jumped and shook because my hands wouldn't stop tensing. Every snap of a twig behind me made my legs tighten like I was about to sprint. I kept thinking, why would Brady go silent? Why would he tell me to go down there? Why was the fire built like that? When I reached the base of the tower and started up the stairs, I felt relief, real, physical relief, because home was above me. For walls, a radio, a place I understood. But the moment I crested the top step, the relief shattered. The lookout station was ransacked. Drawers dumped. Supplies scattered. Papers tossed across the floor like someone had shaken the room until everything fell loose. Things that had been neatly in their place were now overturned. The cot looked disturbed. The small items that made the space feel lived in were wrong, shifted, moved, handled. I stood in the doorway for half a second, and in that half second my body did what it had been trained to do. Freeze, assess, survive. Someone had been inside. Someone had been inside while I was down in the woods, staring at a fire that wasn't a campsite. I grabbed the main station radio, the stronger one, and tried calling Brady again. I called the ranger station. I called anyone on frequency who might answer. Nothing. So I did the only thing left. I radioed authorities and told them something was happening. Trespassers, disturbance, possible danger. My voice didn't sound like mine. It sounded tight, clipped, like I was trying to keep it from cracking. Then I faced a decision I still argue with in my head sometimes. Stay in the tower, barricade, wait for help, or leave. Staying meant high ground, but it also meant being trapped. If someone wanted me up there, they already knew where I was. There was only one way down, and the forest around me was a black ocean. If they came back, I couldn't disappear, couldn't hide, I couldn't move. Leaving meant the dark, but it also meant motion. It meant choices. So I left. I grabbed almost nothing: radio, flashlight, whatever I could carry without thinking, and started down the trail toward the ranger station where Brady was supposed to be. It was about 3 miles, then another mile to the road. In daylight, it was a normal hike. At night, it felt like walking into a mouth. Every sound out there felt amplified. My footsteps sounded like I was announcing myself to everything living. The wind sounded like whispering. The branches above me creaked in a way that made me look up again and again. I kept my flashlight low, trying not to turn myself into a beacon. But I also couldn't afford to walk blind. That contradiction, that constant choice between being seen and being lost, followed me the whole way. Eventually, after what felt like forever, I saw a dim glow through the trees. The ranger station. I felt my chest loosen a little. Not safe, but closer to safe. A human place. A structure. A door. And then I noticed the door was wide open. I called Brady's name as I approached. Brady! No answer. I stepped inside. The place was empty. Not empty like he's asleep in the back. Empty like nobody is here. The kind of empty where you can tell someone left quickly. The kind where your instincts start screaming, don't stay. I didn't linger. I didn't search. I didn't try to make sense of it. I backed out, turned, and ran for the road. When I finally reached it, the open stretch of gravel and the idea of vehicles and headlights felt like oxygen. I stayed there, exposed, cold, breathing too hard, until law enforcement arrived. They searched. Not just a quick sweep. A full perimeter search that stretched into days. Volunteers, rangers, coordinated efforts. The kind of search you only do when someone is truly missing. Brady was never found. And the more time passed, the more it became clear, at least to me, that the bonfire wasn't random. It wasn't careless campers. It wasn't some idiot breaking the rules. It was a distraction. A flare fired into the night to pull me off the tower. And if it pulled me, it could pull Brady too, out of his station, out of safety, into the trees. The state kept everything quiet. It was a tourist-heavy park, and back then it was easier to keep things from becoming a headline. Paperwork disappeared into drawers. Questions were answered with vague phrases. The official story, if there even was one, felt sanitized. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew how it felt. That summer was my last. I never went back to that tower. As far as I know, no one worked it after me. The listing stopped appearing. The assignment disappeared. Like the place itself had been quietly erased. Even now, decades later, I still replay that night in my head, standing on the balcony, spotting that flickering light, hearing Brady's voice tell me to go down there, watching the radio dissolve into static, stepping back into a tower that had been turned inside out. And the thought that never leaves. The thought that shows up when I'm alone in the dark or when I see firelight where it doesn't belong. Is this, if I'd stayed at that bonfire a minute longer, if I'd walked 10 feet deeper into the trees looking for whoever should have been there, I might have vanished the same way Brady did. And someone, somewhere, would still be wondering what happened to the man in the tower.